Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, gave her father 41. Andrew Borden is now dead. Lizzie hit him on the head. Up in heaven he will sing. On the gallows she will swing. Hey there, whistle britches, welcome to Stranger Stitches. Y'all know this is not a news story. This is a story for your consideration that was compiled out of facts I found on the internet, books and newspapers, court reports, that sort of thing. And a big thank you to Dr. Stephanie Corey. She seems to know a whole lot about this topic, and I leaned on her information quite a bit. Lizzie Andrew Borden was born July 19th in 1860 in Fall River, Massachusetts, to Sarah and Andrew Jackson Borden. Her father had grown up in very modest surroundings and had struggled financially as a young man, and despite being a descendant of a wealthy and influential family, his branch of the family tree had lost their money, and anyone on his side had to find their own way in the world. His father became a fish peddler, delivering fish in a pushcart. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was an honest wage. Determined not to follow in those footsteps, Andrew started as a carpenter's apprentice and then just kept climbing. He became partners with Frank Almy in a casket company where they sold Crane's patented casket burial cases. And by all accounts, Andrew was doing pretty well by his family. He also earned some coin as a successful property developer. He went on to have his fingers in a lot of pies. He was a director of several textile mills, owned considerable commercial property. He was also the president of Union Savings Bank and a director of the Durfee Safe Deposit and Trust Company. Remember that name, Durfee. It's going to come up several times. At the time of his death, his estate was valued between $9 and $10 million in today's money, so that ain't chump change. And I find that he was not the miser it was claimed he was. So Andrew Borden purchases a house on 2nd Street, good neighborhood, just one street off from downtown, and he moved his family into this private residence, which he remodels and equips with indoor plumbing, running water, flushy potty, steam radiators, and they had a summer home in Swansea. Well, Lizzie was reportedly dissatisfied with her living conditions at her father's home. Apparently, Andrew did not spend as much money on upper-class comforts as other well-to-do's family did. Well, that's just Daddy's girl being a spoiled brat. He had money, but nobody's funds are limitless. She was 32 and had no concept that she wasn't spending her own money. If it was Daddy's, it was hers. She had also said that she was named Lizzie because her dad was too cheap to give her a full name. The Borden family actually had 3 daughters. In between Emma and Lizzie, there was a little girl named Alice that passed away when she was 2. And folks around said that Sarah just wasn't the same after that. And seriously, who would be? When Sarah passed, her daughters Emma and Lizzie were just 12 and 3 years old. On the deathbed, Emma made a promise that she would always look over baby Lizzie. 3 years later, Andrew Borden married Abby Durfee Gray. She is a stout 37-year-old woman who took over management of the household and the upbringing of the daughters. Andrew needed someone to manage the home, and Abby got the security of a well-to-do husband. At the time, Andrew was 42, so it wasn't like some child bride situation. The sisters referred to Abby's family as the pushcart people. Sound familiar? Seems like they forgot their roots. Although Lizzie was too young to remember Sarah, she knew Abby wasn't her mom. At first, she had referred to Abby as a mother, but later disagreements stopped all that familiarity, and she and Emma went on to call her Mrs. Borden. Relations between the older and younger Borden women were very chilly. Perhaps the girls resented Abby as a rival for their father's attention and the money. Emma and Lizzie avoided eating with them or sharing any time with them, even sharing the household chores whenever their stepmother was present. They avoided her whenever possible. Historic accounts suggest that Lizzie did have a very good relationship with her father when she was young. Lizzie gave her father a ring. It was gold, and he reportedly prized that. It was his prized possession. He wore it on his little finger. It was something that he really cherished. As time went on, there were signs that father-daughter relationship was getting strained. Nonetheless, he wore that ring every day and was buried with it. Acquaintances described the Borden house as a scene of a Cold War after Andrew bailed out his wife's half-sibling by buying a house and putting it in Abby's name, which his daughters resented, and they weren't quiet about it. They said that Daddy should do for them the same as he had done for the in-laws. Well, okay, no problem. He sees an opportunity to get the girls interested in business, and he gave them a piece of investment property. Well, the girls decided it was too much trouble, and they had to pay taxes, and it wasn't enough money to be worth the trouble. So Andrew bought the property back from them at a good bit more than it was worth. So he was crossing his daughters with some cash. And that whole in-law stuff, it was resolved a short time later. It was revealed to be just a business maneuver. The sisters' inheritance was intact, but they couldn't bother to get over themselves. Lizzie had been gifted a grand tour about the time of her 30th birthday aboard the Cunarder Scythia from Boston to Liverpool for a 19-week tour of Europe, and she went with 5 other maiden ladies and a chaperone, all paid for by Daddy, of course. He even wired her extra money when she had gone through her allowance. But okay, here's a small thing. I think the name of the ship is wrong. The Scythia made a maiden voyage in 1920, unless the ship company had something of the same name right before that. So at that time, Lizzie would have been closer to 50 and her parents long gone, but I'm obsessing and I need to move along. Emma was out of town when the event happened. She was over at the dressmaker's getting some new duds made, so it doesn't sound like anybody was suffering too much. And so I wanted to understand what was going on in the household that immediately preceded the event, and it seems like there was some stuff brewing, like a thunderstorm on a hot summer day. Those can come up fast and wicked. This trouble started percolating when Andrew Borden, who was known to be a shrewd businessman, had some heated words with a stranger who was trying to rent a store from him. Now, in a small town like Fall River, when Andrew Borden raises his voice, folks hear him, and he was not one to suffer a fool. Word has it that this unknown man left that conversation all kind of pissed off. What they argued about, well, details aren't given, but it was enough to set tongues wagging over the tone and volume. What I do know is that Andrew was very picky who he rented to. The type of store to be run from his properties would have made a difference. He was a temperance man, and he wouldn't have approved of anything like a bar or a saloon or anything that didn't represent wholesome family values. His words, not mine. 2 weeks before the murders, that same old Henri fella come, to talk to him again. Big brass balls. Yeah, and this time he had the audacity to go right up to the doorstep for what witnesses again described as a animated conversation with Andrew about, again, renting one of the stores. And when they say animated, this is in polite society, and what they mean is those 2 men were about to go at it like cats in a sack. The neighbors probably heard their voices carrying through. And being proper folks, they would never admit to listening at the windows or suddenly having the need to go out and trim the roses. Andrew Borden was a man that drove a hard bargain, and it seemed that this mystery man was not taking no for an answer. And we're going to look at a couple of peculiar events. Let's see, this was the Sunday before the murder. Somebody saw a man with his face blacked out and his hands black as midnight, and it looked like it was from something like burnt cork or chimney soot. Nobody could say for sure, but he was spotted, kind of, their words, loafing around near the Durfee ice houses, and that was just up the road. Remember, Durfee was the maiden name of the current Mrs. Borden. Now, it's very suspicious behavior for a Sunday when all the God-fearing folks are either in church or home with families. This mysterious figure was seen skulking around, and he had no business being there. The businesses were closed. Nobody was there. And then what do you know? Poof! Vanished like the morning mist. After that Sunday, not a soul ever laid eyes on him again. Kind of makes you wonder what was going on. Nobody recognized him, didn't know who he was, and never saw him again. Okay, that's curious. Well, a few days before the murder, the Borden household, including Lizzie, Andrew, Abby, and Bridget Sullivan, who was their housekeeper, they all experienced a mysterious illness that had horrible symptoms, stomach symptoms. Everybody's, puking, and yeah, it was awful. Well, this illness led to suspicions that the family had been poisoned. Some speculated about spoiled food, while others consider it a deliberate act. Bridget said that she was very careful with the food. That was mostly her responsibility, and the milk can was cleaned and replaced every day. Check this out, y'all. Lizzie had attempted to purchase some poison. A druggist testified that on the day before the murder, Lizzie Borden attempted to buy prussic acid. This is also known as hydrogen cyanide. It is extremely poisonous. If y'all ever see this, run away. But her reasoning was it is used in cleaning seal skin, and she claimed that she needed it to clean a coat. But the druggist refused to sell it to her without a prescription. Check this out, y'all. In the medicine of the day, they could use hydrogen cyanide to refocus and rebalance the body. Okay, no, thank you. But we know that now. And just another thought, this was August. And who was thinking about furs in the summer? Well, maybe she was trying to get ready for the winter. That could be. Some people plan ahead. But do you think Daddy's little girl would be cleaning that fur herself, or would we have had a furrier clean it for her professionally? We're on to the final night before the devil walked through their door. John V. Morris, this was Andrew's brother-in-law from his first wife, and this man knew which side of his bread got the butter. He and Andrew often had some business dealings together, and it served both of them very well. He had arrived at the Borden house around 1:30 in the afternoon. Now, even though John was family and kind of close to him, he was the type who never visited without some business agenda up his sleeve. Well, we don't know exactly what that business was, but he did come to talk to Andrew. He had dinner with them and the family, and all civilized like, then he took himself off to Swansea, about 5 miles away, sometimes between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. What he was doing there and what business he had, that's between him and a gravestone. Come evening, round 8:30, John Morris returned to the Borden home. Mrs. Borden herself answered the door. Poor soul, answering her own door. Oh, my goodness, got the vapors. Then all three of them, Andrew, Abby, and John, settled themselves into the parlor room for what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary evening of family conversation. They sat there chatting about this and that and this and that until just after 10 o'clock, when decent folks ought to start calling it a day. Morning comes early. Now, things are interesting again. Somehow, John V. Morris was very careful to say that he presumed this was Lizzie walking up the stairs. He was the last one to go to bed, and he heard someone coming purposefully up the stairs and then shut themselves up in Lizzie's room, tight as a tomb. The door clicked shut, and it stayed there. John, bless his heart, claimed he never saw anybody, but was pretty sure it was Lizzie. Okay, that's kind of convenient, but we'll go on for now. So the usual quiet settled over the house. The Bordens were in their room. John V. had gone up to the room, the guest room, right above the parlor that was to be the scene of the crime for Abby the next day. And whoever locked themselves up in Lizzie's room was still there. And that room remained shut tight as yoga pants all night. And nobody had any idea that two of those people would not see another sunset. Sometimes the night before a tragedy just feels like any other night. And that brings us to August 4th, 1892. It was a Thursday, and this is the day of the murders. Oh, bless us all. This was the day that would make that family infamous, when the devil himself walked through their door and smashed in the heads of Andrew and Abby Borden. So let's start around 6 a.m. when John V. Morris, Andrew's brother-in-law, rose very early, dressed himself with care, took care of his grooming, all that kind of good stuff, probably shined his shoes and tidied up a bit, and he came downstairs. I believe it was Bridget that said she heard him, and all the while, Lizzie's door remained shut tight as a drum. Nobody's seen Lizzie yet. But she was one to sleep in, so around 7, the household starts to gather around the breakfast table, and everything was real civil. Mr. and Mrs. Borden, John V. Morris sharing the morning meal, passing around a newspaper, whatever families did at the time. It was all just fine. Picture of domestic tranquility, if you can believe that. Well, about half an hour later, breakfast is wrapping up, and the family starts to shuffle off to do their own chores and get their own day started. Mr. Borden and Mr. Morris retire to the sitting room to conduct whatever business they had going, as men folks were wont to do back in the day. Mrs. Borden takes up dusting cloths and starts to tend the endless battle against dust that settles on everything. Around 7:45, Mrs. Borden goes on to clean the front hall. Her movements methodical, precise. She's done this a million times, gonna do it a million more, and it came to her that the windows needed to be washed, so she was going to assign that to Bridget. Around 9 a.m., that gentleman calls again at the Borden house. He had business on his mind, and he was going to try everything he knew to get his foot in that door with Andrew. Well, they conduct their conversation while Lizzie claims that she never laid eyes on anybody, though she heard the sound of her father shutting the door and thinking that the man had already left. And wouldn't that work well with her story, right? About 9:50, Miss Delia Manley and Sarah Hart, they were two ladies who were known to mind their own business and everyone else's, say they spot a young man loafing or spying around the Borden's gate. In a town like Fall River, such behavior does not go unnoticed. Folks have eyes in the back of their head when it comes to anything unusual going on. Well, between 10:20 and 10:40, and all these times are approximate, Dr. Handy, the neighborhood GP, is making his rounds, down 2nd Street in his carriage, and he catches sight of a wide-eyed, pale man walking slow as cold syrup near the Borden house. I don't know if this was the same man that the ladies had reported seeing, but I kind of think it was, because there was nobody else reported, and, it wasn't that far apart. Now, a doctor knows trouble when he sees it, and this fella had the look of a man carrying demons. Was this the same man as was over to the Durfee Ice House? Nobody knows, because there was no comparative sketches or anything like that made. The witnesses never talked to the doctors, never followed that line of questioning. So, while that was happening outside the house, this was going on inside. Bridget Sullivan, the housekeeper, they insisted on calling her Maggie after their previous maid couldn't be bothered to learn a new name, but I don't think that's all the way true. But she hears the City Hall bell strike 11. And she'd been outside, having been ordered to wash the windows, even though she was still sick as a dog. She was washing and puking. And that's when Lizzie's voice rings through the house like a banshee's wail. She says, "Maggie, come here. Father is dead. Somebody came in and killed him." Bridget hurries over to her and finds Andrew Borden in the sitting room. Mercy, damn what she walked into. Not to be insensitive, but can you imagine walking in on something like that when your stomach is already tore up? And quick side note, because I got to get this off my head before I forget. Bridget was sometimes used a pejorative name for an Irish lady that cleaned house, Irish maids. It was like people would say, "Do you have your Bridget?" They were all called Bridget. So the family referred to their Bridget as Maggie because they weren't using a pejorative name for her. And at least that's how that's how I want to look at it. But I digress, as I often do, and thank y'all for sticking with me. But I'm going to call her Bridget because that is her given name. Her nerves are already shot, and a couple of the neighbor ladies hear the commotion, and they come over. They come running, actually. Mrs. Churchill, and they went to look for Mrs. Borden. Mercy damn again, they find her dead as a doornail in the upstairs guest bedroom. I think Abby must have been totally taken by surprise. I think whomever did this came in the room fast and swung quick. That first blow, before she could even cry out or raise her hands, that would have been what was called the flap wound, and down she went. The next, I think, was a blow to her upper back, just below her neck, swung in a hurry with little or no aim because Abby was still moving. And once again, fear fueled that swing. And oh my gosh, she couldn't be allowed to get up or cry out. The killer had to act fast. All the ones after that were pretty much to her head. And they did keep her down. They kept her quiet. Whoever did it had every intention of Abby Borden never getting up again. If we were to look at it with today's forensics, we could say that this was driven by fear, anger, and hate. Let's talk about that doggerel, about the nursery rhyme that every kid knows. The public largely believes that the weapon was an axe. It wasn't an axe, it was a hatchet, smaller, lighter, easier to sharpen. A lady might have been able to wield it more easily, and the killer didn't strike 40-something times like the rhyme suggests. Nope, it was 19 blows for Abby Borden and 10, 11, 12 for Andrew. Made his face completely unrecognizable. Oh, that's still plenty. Makes my blood run cold as a corpse. The murders took place about an hour and a half apart, according to the medical examination of the stomach contents. So, Abby was on the floor of the guest room 90 minutes before the attack on her husband. That means that whoever did this had time to think, time to plan, time to strike again. I also want to think they had time to change their mind, time to run away, but they didn't do it. This was not a crime of sudden passion. This was as calculated as a chess move. Once committed, there was no going back. So, if the medical examiner's assertions are correct, Abby was killed about the same time. There was that heated argument going on out in the porch or in the front room, probably out on the porch. But Abby would have died at about 9 o'clock. And nobody heard anything? Not over the argument that was going outside. Can you imagine? Yeah, maybe that man, the one with the big brass balls and wanting to rent the store, maybe he had something to do with it. Maybe he was intending to distract Andrew. Maybe the killer knew that they couldn't take on two victims at once, so there had to be some way to make sure that they were separated and the killer could take them down one at a time. So the bodies are found, the murders have happened, and later that day, Lizzie Borden finds herself face to face with cops and investigators answering their questions about the most terrible day of her life. And how did she bear up under the scrutiny? Well, she did just fine. She was calm and composed. Very sketch, according to the police, very sketch. But she had been given a big dose of morphine for her nerves. No wonder she was so calm. I'd be calm too. So if you're too nervous or you're too calm, either way don't look good if the cops already don't like you, and apparently they were already leaning toward Lizzie being guilty. It was noted that there was no blood on her clothes except for on her petticoat. Now, if she was on her cycle, she would not have talked to a man about that. Next day, a man named John Joseph Mayer gets himself arrested for public drunkenness. But here's a part, very curious. He seemed to know a whole lot about the murders. And you know, sometimes a drunk can't shut up. But how does he know about all these killings that just happened? Authorities released him pretty quick, but it does make you wonder, doesn't it? Gossip travels fast, and a little liquor makes it travel faster. I wonder what the talk was going on at wherever he was drinking at. So let's take another little side quest, and I'll give you some background information on what might have helped shape this case. It was the case of Mary Harris. Her trial established the feminine frailty defense, blazing a trail that was used in courtrooms for decades. This poor Iowa girl was put to work in a hat-making shop when she was 9 years old, y'all, 9, where Adoniram Judson Burroughs, can I just call him Burroughs? That name's a mouthful. He was a grown man who should have known better, but he set his predatory sights on a 9-year-old girl. For 3 years, this scoundrel courted that child, providing money and a little education. He was forming her into something that would have been more acceptable in his social circles, and kept on grooming her for his own twisted purposes. Burroughs proved as flighty as a hummingbird. He moved from Iowa to Chicago to Washington, D.C., always making promises, sweeter than honey and just as sticky. When Mary turned 18, he asked her to join him, so she's known him for 9 years, always under the assumption that that would be her husband. But that faithless little bastard was already playing games. Through a series of unsigned letters and some deceptions, Mary discovered the truth. Burroughs had married another woman and left her nothing but lies. A heart full of rage, far away from her family. What was a girl to do? Well, on January 31st, 1865, so this is a ways back, Mary Harris found out where Burroughs had been living his double life and shot him twice, just outside his office. At her trial, her lawyer, Joseph Bradley, argued that a woman's delicate constitution could be driven to temporary madness by a faithless man's cruelty. Yeah, he was there for all of that. Medical experts testified, and I quote, "Hacking is an almost positive sign of a deed by a woman who is unconscious of what she is doing." Yeah, and that hacking they were referring to later on, was the Lizzie Borden case. And it established the notion that a woman's reproductive functions and emotional fragility could lead to temporary insanity. Well, in the case of Mary's trial, the jury could not bring themselves to condemn a woman who had been so thoroughly destroyed by this man. Mary Harris walked out of there a free woman, and the precedent was set. A woman's mind could be fragile as spun sugar, and the right circumstances could shatter her completely. That precedent was sitting there like a loaded gun, just waiting for the right lawyer to pick it up and fire it in defense of another woman accused of murder. Now, here's another supposition that comes just out of my own mind, and this was the year 1892. Jack the Ripper's case was officially closed on that same year, with no leads found and no further murders recorded. That case was closed, and it might be the elephant in the room, or I could say the phantom in the fog. Jack the Ripper had been dominating newspaper headlines and dinner table conversations for many years. His gruesome deeds were splashed across every front page from here to Kingdom Come. The investigation into those London murders had stretched well beyond 1888, with the finest detectives in Scotland Yard running around like hounds that had lost the scent. The authorities tried their level best to connect all those killings to one person, but they might as well have been trying to catch smoke in a tea sieve. The monster had simply vanished into the London mist, leaving nothing behind but questions and corpses. But here's the thing. It's just chilly. The proof was right there in black and white, printed in every newspaper across America. You could commit the most heinous crimes imaginable, terrorize and terrify, and slip away scot-free if you were clever enough about it. The message was clear. You could kill and get away with it. Lizzie Borden would have been very well aware of this case, and Lord knows every literate person in America was following that story. It was like a penny dreadful that you could get delivered to the door. But so did everyone else follow this story, including potential killers who might have taken note that sometimes, just sometimes, murder could go unpunished if you covered your tracks well enough. The Ripper had shown the world that even the most savage crimes could remain unsolved, and that lesson wasn't lost on folks either side of the pond. Let's look into the investigation and the inquest. Between August 9th and 11th, the coroner conducts a closed inquest, and this is one of the biggest legal blunders in this whole case. Let me tell you, it might have been the most boneheaded decision in legal history. The inquest was what they called a closed inquiry, which means poor Lizzie was sitting in that room answering questions without privilege of attorney by her side. No representation, not one. Can you imagine? Lizzie testified without any legal representation, likely she was still under the influence of the morphine, and she had been prescribed a double dose by this time. She was questioned extensively by District Attorney Hosea Knowlton, and bless her heart, she should have kept that pie hole shut and called on the Fifth Amendment. What is lawyers for? They speak for you, and she didn't have that privilege. Her responses were described as confused and contradictory, and Lord knows they had every right to be. First, she claimed that she was downstairs ironing handkerchiefs, and then later went upstairs and then downstairs, and then saying that she was ironing before going to the barn. So was she upstairs or downstairs? Girl couldn't keep her story straight. And did it take 90 minutes for her to come down the stairs? timeline don't exactly match. She mentioned that her stepmother, Abby, had received a mysterious note, something for a sick call, and that was summoning her to go visit a sick friend. It's one of those things, can you come make the tea and heat the soup sort of thing? And that's why Abby thought to leave the house, but she didn't. She was still there. She didn't go anywhere. But where's that note? Everybody took the house apart, and nobody ever found a note, not a trace of it. Was that again trying to separate the victims? Trying to get one out of the house so they could handle one at a time? I'm just thinking out loud right now. And then she claimed that she was out in the barn loft looking for lead sinkers for a fishing trip, and that was where she was when the murders occurred. Now, it's August, and I've heard that it was around 80 degrees, so up in the attic of a barn, it's bound to be a lot hotter. And anybody would, it would be hotter than a devil's armpit. Plus, nobody else knew about this supposed fishing trip. She wasn't exactly known to be an avid angler, and when the police investigated, the barn was dusty as an old attic. There were no footprints, no handprints, nothing to show that anybody had gone up the ladder. And she did admit to having some relationships with her stepmother. Well, y'all think? We're talking about that whole Cold War situation that had been brewing in the house for quite some time. So there's a panel of 3 judges that took a look at this coroner's inquest and said, hang on, hold up a skinny minute. They concluded that at the time of the coroner's inquest, for all practical purposes, Lizzie was a prisoner and charged with 2 murders. And when you're a prisoner, you've got your rights. Miranda wasn't a thing for many years to come, but you still had rights. Her testimony was made without her attorney present and was not voluntary. She was told that she had to. The judges ruled the testimony inadmissible, saying that Lizzie should have been warned that she had the right to call on the Fifth Amendment and remain silent. Sit tight right there and keep your pie hole closed. Well, the state tried to argue, oh no, she was just a suspect, not a prisoner, but the judges weren't having none of it. They said, nice try, but no cigar. This was Lizzie's only testimony during the entire legal proceedings, and it got thrown out faster than yesterday's fish because of the way the information was acquired. Not sure that a lot of that would have helped her anyway. From August 11th through the 18th, we continue to hear testimony. The workers at Swansea Estate confirmed John Morris's alibi. Yes, he was there. The police had dug up, and found some clothing, bloody clothing, buried out in the Borden's backyard. Now, what John Morris had said he had done was he had the murder clothes buried there because they were very bloody and they had some people parts still in them. So it was the Christian thing to do to see that all that got buried. I don't get it. If the bodies had already been taken to a funeral parlor or some place to be, set up and casketed and all that stuff, why weren't the clothes just buried with them? Again, I don't get it, but I don't have to. Lizzie is arraigned, and she pleads not guilty. She is held over at the Taunton jail or under house arrest, depending on which reporter you believe. And various other suspicious reports come to light. There's a couple of cabbies that mentioned that this guy wanted a quick trip to New Bedford, wanted to get out of town right away. They declined because of the murder that had just happened, and they weren't going out on a long ride with somebody they didn't know or be part of helping a killer get away, so it was a polite no thank you, and the guy went on his way. A man named George Bentley said an Italian man left him with a blood-stained carpet bag and a note that said it was for Peter Sarity. Well, this sounds like a big red herring to me, because nothing ever came of either of those names. There was no evidence, nothing like that. Then there was the reports of the men loafing around the Durfee ice houses, on the sidewalks, the man that had smeared his face and hands with soot or something. All of this came out and was recorded at trial. There was a lot of articles being published around this time, and Patrick McGrath wrote his article, Inside Lizzie Borden's House of Horrors, See What I Have Done. And the Boston Globe got hold of it and said Judge Blaisdell finds that Lizzie is probably guilty. And this was in September. Lizzie Borden wasn't indicted until December. Okay, well, they're trying to get her guilty already. In January, a young man named Alfred A. Smith comes forward. Well, he was only 16 at the time, but he makes a statement about finding bloody hatchet and gloves on the Borden property the day of the murder. But he hadn't come forward before, so probably not a lot of weight was placed on his testimony. Well, Miss Alice Russell gives testimony that provides a pretty compelling testimony about Lizzie's words the night before. She said, I feel something is hanging over me, and I feel afraid that something's going to happen. Oh, and I might be going on vacation soon. Miss Russell, bless her nosy little heart, had a story to tell about the dress burning incident. She testified that Lizzie was burning the dress to get rid of it because it was covered in paint. Okay. Well, paint in August on a dress worn by a lady who wasn't known for a whole lot of manual labor or artistic pursuits, and the defense tried to spin this, suggesting a guilty person wouldn't be so obvious about destroying evidence, but sometimes the most obvious explanation is the right one, or if your criminal is real stupid or real brave and they think they're going to get away with everything. Miss Russell also testified about that mysterious note that was supposed to summon Abby out of the house. Well, she said that she never saw any note and kind of sarcastically suggested that maybe Abby had burned the note. Lizzie replied in all seriousness, yes, she must have. Maybe that's what happened. Real convenient, don't you think? Well, Bridget Sullivan gave her account, stuck to her story, word for word, said what she saw. John V. Morris, his convenient memory again. He gave testimony to the fact that he did hear somebody moving around in the house that night, but only presumed it was Lizzie. So that was a presumption, but they did hear him. The pharmacist gave testimony that Lizzie had indeed tried to buy the cyanide with the excuse of cleaning a coat, but she never got the cyanide. Well, after all this testimony, the jury returned a verdict that shocked and satisfied others. Lizzie Borden was acquitted of the murders, whether it was the precedent of feminine frailty, the inadmissible inquest testimony, or simply the lack of ironclad evidence. 12 men looked at this case and decided they could not send a lady to the gallows. The courtroom erupted. Lizzie walked free into a life that would be ever covered with doubt. But let's move on to a little theory, and that really didn't get looked to probably as much as they should have been. There were rumors of a Dufresne conspiracy. It seems that they were into the Borden family for a whole lot of money. Bumping off the Bordens would have made good business sense. This wasn't checked out. Various other theories involve strangers in the area with some connection to the family. The big brass balls man, the man that was mad about not getting the store rental, the man that was seen skulking around the gate, all of those. And nobody could ever find any evidence or any connection. A couple of witnesses came forward too late, but they did describe some mighty peculiar characters that they had seen hanging around the Borden house in the days prior to those souls meeting their maker, two gentlemen who lived near the Bordens spotted a man sitting on the sidewalk. Yeah, just sitting there. They tried to make conversation, just being neighborly, trying to find out what you're doing. This is a nice neighborhood. We don't sit on sidewalks. Move along. And he didn't respond. Not one thing. The man didn't say anything. He didn't really appear to be drunk either. Just sat there, staring. Well, two other townspeople confirmed seeing that pale young man who had that strange air about him. One even said that she saw him leaning on the Borden's gatepost. All of this comes too late for the trial. But the police, I think, had already found their woman, and that was the only avenue they were pursuing. And all of this is coming out after the fact. A farmer came forward and said he was out in the woods about 4 miles outside of town when he said he heard something. And it was a man repeating the words, "Poor Mrs. Borden," to himself for 3-4 times, like some sort of little prayer he was saying. The farmer, who only spoke French, tried to get a conversation with this fella, but received nothing in response. And then this gets bone chilling, this shiversome. The man picked up a hatchet that he had right next to him and shook it at the farmer like he was warding off demons. Well, the farmer wasn't intimidated by this wild-eyed stranger, so he shook his axe right back at him. And that prompted the mysterious man to jump over a stone wall and disappear into the woods like a ghost. But not before the farmer noticed specks of blood on the man's shirt. The poor man contacted the police, but it was way too late to talk about this bizarre encounter. Well, I know of a story called The Leather Man, and he was a real person that walked a circuit around New England, and he did go into Massachusetts, but probably not close enough to Fall River for that to be him. Anyhow, the Leatherman's going to get his own episode coming up. And all of this was too late for the trial anyway. Either way, Lizzie was found not guilty. Well, I have one more alternative theory for you, and this is just from me. Is it a possibility that John and Emma cooked up something? Well, with the parents out of the way and Lizzie locked up for the crime, that gave each of them a whole lot of money they didn't have to work for. Wouldn't that be convenient? And isn't it also kind of coinky-dink that both of them had made plans to be out of town and had rock-solid alibis and witnesses at the time these crimes were committed? It's just saying, it could be a possibility, but so many things could. Way too late to do anything about it now. Well, years roll by, and in the spring of 1900, Lizzie complains to Mr. Brayton, see, they still live in there, and about his rooster. Yeah, that's the same man who owns the farm where the original axe was found. In 1905, Lizzie and Emma have a dispute. Emma moves out, never speaks to Lizzie again, and reportedly this was over actress Nance O'Neill. Yeah, anyhow, this was a famous actress at the time, and she'd done a lot of plays and stage work and stuff like that. But also, it wasn't no big secret that she was broke as hell, and Lizzie looked like an easy target. In 1912, John V. Morris dies in Iowa. He had a heart problem, and yeah, if he knew anything, he took it to his grave. June 1st, 1927, Lizzie dies at the age of 66, leaving an estate worth nearly $1 million. She left $500 for the perpetual care of her father's grave. Very clever, since they were all buried on the same plot. Yeah, she was tending her own grave. And her marker reads Lisbeth. So, I guess she finally got her full name. So, that's the story in my eyes. What do y'all think? Did she do it? Is she innocent? Could there be some conspiracy? I don't know. We're never really gonna know, I don't think. But thanks for sticking with me, y'all. That's me for this week. Sweet dreams. See you next time.